I'm not even sure which of the channels this is actually being uploaded to, but we do have quite a few pages now into um, mostly finished. Like there's a lot of editing that needs to get done. But if I'm literally looking at the book here, this book of Nahx is completed up to chapter 3 and or through chapter 3. And there might be tweaks since there's definitely a lot of editing and um, things to do with it, but we're going to read as far as we can into this for this session and see where we get to. So thank you for coming along for the ride, journey. This has been a lot of work, and we begin at page 1. Book of Nahx, acknowledgments and introductions. Hopefully it's not super small, and big enough that maybe you can read it in resolutions. But it starts with a fairly long paragraph. It reads, the multicultural virtuosity that has been demonstrated by those whom I have encountered personally, by way of happenstance, the authorship of many historical people's life work because of both my intentional and unintentional curiosities, and eventually with the practical application of many seemingly overlooked yet profoundly helpful practices in prayer, meditation, journaling, reading, walking, observing, and questioning, has brought about an inevitable softening that occurred when I made myself aware of something simple and obvious. I have come to understand it as the subtle body, and can now comprehend what it can communicate impeccably and with absolute necessity and accuracy, and without fail. So, with this essential magnification of my own intuition, which has inevitably led me to this moment in time, finally writing this book. The answer is yes, that whole paragraph is in fact one sentence. As I have become enveloped in an ever-evolving process of self-discovery throughout many years of effort, there have certainly been innumerable influences that have appeared in my life. My hope remains steadfast as I aim to curtail many preconceived notions and unnaturally developed opinions into something that is an intelligible and comprehensible flow of plainly spoken words that might be helpful to anyone who can successfully read and stomach each page that follows. Although I hesitated to use that word influences, what I intended to communicate was that these words and ideas are certainly not solely my own. There are, in fact, so many people to acknowledge that I believe a whole chapter should be dedicated to that purpose, so I reserve the right to do so here and now on the very first page. Having had a career in door-to-door sales relatively early in life, I was granted access to homes and their respective living quarters of many people throughout the western states of America. This experience by itself, I believe, sets me apart from many others. The opportunity to work in such a field provided me with a proverbial wide open door and a consistent exposure that enabled me to observe social norms that the majority, who to the best of my knowledge are more often meagerly exposed to, if at all, to witness something that over time becomes extremely convincing. The lies and illusions that mask an otherwise suffering society prevail and hail the coming of a necessary transformational energy that is unprecedented. The experiences that I had in this field had given me an opportunity to encounter firsthand what so few perhaps could, and it was heartbreaking. Specifically, and it is certainly worth mentioning, the primary service that I sold was in fact television programming. Not only did this enable a growing perspective of many homes, their respective neighborhoods, and the variations of the living conditions within, it also permitted me a doorway to conceive something greater, a deeper and more intimate-rooted understanding pertaining to the utility and value of entertainment in the modern world. This experience had commenced not too long following a dramatic end to my otherwise intended career, which had been in graphic design and web development. That career had afforded me a brief opportunity to survey the fundamental outlines of many basic and simple programming languages, i.e. HTML, CSS, PHP, JavaScript, etc. My time in this field was extremely brief, and so it was never revealed to me what I could have done, not to mention would have done eventually and intentionally. What is noteworthy, however, is that within the 2 years of working in web implementation, I was certainly not put in a position to grow. I was neither supported nor encouraged by any supposed leadership, and the workplace was, for lack of a better description, a drag. My individual aptitudes, skills, and inclinations remained obscure to me, and I was essentially bored out of my mind doing remedial tasks. I am ultimately grateful that an end to this career came, although I am not extremely proud about the reasons that it did. But I can now recognize what has been afforded to me alternatively from an internal perspective. What had seemed like a massive setback then has since catapulted me into perpetual new avenues, explorations, and exposures, which have in turn provided me with the ultimate gift of life, the many experiences which have successfully exposed who I actually am. In order to flourish, blossom, and present to the world, I must find a nurturing environment. By way of these two early careers in conjunction with a series of unfortunate or fortunate events, whichever you are inclined to entertain, I have become extremely grateful for the lessons learned along the more difficult route. To realize that life is full of unexpected ups, downs, and inevitable turning points. I remain steadfast and still, because at any point the experience of this life is best received in a simplistic way, one singular moment at a time, and I do my best to relish it. All the world's a stage, and all the men and women merely players. They have their exits and their entrances, and one man in his time plays many parts. William Shakespeare's 7 Ages of Man speech. Regardless, all I can say now is that at a certain point in time, I realized that what I wanted to do was create a brand that would stand for something, and that is precisely what I set out to do, eventually. Knock, knock. Book of Nahx Beginnings. An ever-widening chasm between what is true, universal understandings and natural laws, and what has become the lie, demonstrable by the barrage of preemptive narratives presented on the global stage, have grown by an incredible measure, especially since the development of the internet. This has offset and essentially replaced the notion of truth with unrelenting and forceful proclamations of conglomerate communication companies. This growing energy field is what I am firmly and devotedly standing against. The most difficult reality for me to accept is that there are likely so few who are inclined to entertain many of the notions that are outlined in this text. The objective of my work and study has certainly been to more deeply comprehend and understand. However, there remains a certainty to that end, and that is ultimately failure. As it has become undeniably apparent, understanding so much of the world is indeed impossible. So instead, I am left with one thing that is indeed within my control. Myself. As a rising global consciousness is indeed at hand, I continue to pray and hope for many things beyond myself, for the collective whole, and while also undertaking the daunting task of daily meditation, I seek myself. As my interest in various modalities and spiritual practices have broadened, I submit that my most pervasive or difficult resolutions have come out of an inevitable unlearning process as opposed to a learning process. By the application of just a few new habits, I have been able to unlearn so much related to both the world and myself. At one point in time, within a single instance, a monumental moment of clarity was received. I will expand on this experience at some point in this book, but what is perhaps most important to share with you now is that I have finally developed a relationship with God, deity, or a higher power that is all-encompassing. Take your pick. If you have a difficult time with any of these various words, then that is on you, not me. I do not proclaim to know your preferences and aversions in any regard, and I will not provoke you or attempt to persuade you either. With an ever-broadening application and devotion to yoga, pranayama, breathing, as well as both silent and sound meditations, I invariably uncovered something that I believe is possible for all of us. I have walked numerous paths and crossed many lands, reading alone and studying literature in a variety of group settings with and without group discussion. One might say I have lived many lives, and I would not disagree. Because of these few attributes, as well as the way in which I was raised and nurtured, I have become an extremely adaptable individual. There has been an obvious increase in my intuition, sensitivity, caring, efficacy, and utility relative to others that are at times extremely uncomfortable, especially in my personal relationships, because the feelings that surface are, dare I even say it, superhuman. By measure of intensity, these alterations in my perceptivity on the macroscopic scale are perhaps most closely equivalent to the Richter scale, which measures the energy output of earthquakes. This has been made evident to me by those who have listened to me speak and those within a most peculiar proximity to my creative work, including but not limited to this very book, while it is under development. And as for the superhuman comment, it is intended to communicate a differentiation between myself and my fellows, but this is not necessarily for better nor worse, just exaggerated. From the characterizations, communications, and even the development of these pages prior to any publication, there is an evident shift occurring in the world. This is what I am referring to about the macroscopic scale. Macroscopic is a term related to quantum entanglements that have been increasing dramatically in recent years. This is the equivalent of what is known as manifestation for the alleged layman. Although these differences are not so much visible, they are in fact perceptible, but only once the gates of hell have opened, and you decide to unwittingly trudge forward against all odds. I recognize many interesting correlations between what I create and what has become perceptible to the masses through instrumentation of television, radio, and any other adequate forms of broadcasting, microphones. My intuition is my own and derived out of a myriad of subjective experiences. I recognize that there is nothing I can tell you or show you merely through words on paper. So throughout these pages, you will encounter a littering and smattering of contextually related quotes, many-cited works by countless authors, musicians, and mentors, outlines of events and their relative happenings, as well as personal thoughts like this one. As I search and plead for awareness of my true self to become known to myself, I remain to this day fearful of becoming something that has always lurked as an unintended consequence, to become known to the world as myself. These should help you to more deeply ascertain an understanding through a contemplative meditation gap that is related to the topics that are discussed. On a most personal note, what may in fact be the only validation of my claims will not come from me, but rather from those who are near and dear to me, the ones who communicate an endearing, compassionate, and unconditional love with a teetering, but altogether necessary tolerance of my temperament and attitude. Those who have undoubtedly assisted in softening my heart and slowing my mind, allowing me to focus long enough to just write and forget the world while I do, are the true miracle workers, the angels of the court. It had always been a great fear of mine to share what will inevitably be found within this book, my songs, my journals, my thoughts, and my most life-altering experiences, but I yield to faith that it will serve you well. And if there is one thing I know and have the authority to speak on, it is certainly limited to myself. There are no simple answers to any of the questions herein. What I will be sharing has come as a result of a relationship with those who have answered my calls and operated with due diligence, permitting me to discern a lot of information. Additionally, what I do have today, that I have never had before, is a validating spotlight and assistance from the earthly realm that swoops in to assist me in my assessments and deliveries. My plan for whatever is to come is null and void, as I choose to remain open to what results from this effort. I am, however, personally attempting to move beyond the fear that has rendered me essentially useless. For a substantial amount of time, especially in my latter years, I have avoided this deep, intense, and transformative work that will declare proudly what I have maintained as my truth for the past 7 years consciously, but much longer unconsciously. The fear of becoming known is at hand, so if this work does in fact become something that is helpful to you, then that is the blessing, and will make it all worthwhile. I choose to accept the eternal blessings in lieu of the material, and will give away what has been so freely given to me. Freely you have received, freely give. That's a quote from Matthew chapter 10, verse 8 of the New Testament. The very idea or notion of consciousness rising is foreign or perhaps inconceivable to the majority. Of the few who have undertaken the task of outlining the process or attempting to share it with any specific audience, there remains a paradoxical limitation. This is typically an axiom between an educational outline or a personal approach. I will attempt to incorporate both. However, I believe that only by the practical application of a personalized process can we effectively understand anything. To put that plainly, we can only understand something through our first-hand experience. Life will always remain the true teacher, and nothing can prevent a lesson from being learned. An education, an outline, and a map are certainly useful, but unfortunately rarely result in any effective long-term change, deep understanding, and certainly not an intuitive knowing. With that said, among the many obstacles ahead will be consternation and disruption that is intended to shake your core beliefs, should you have any. If you do not desire this, then I encourage you to stop now. Please, act upon that inclination that is ingrained in your initial instinct, driven from fear and for the sake of self-preservation. I invite you to demonstrate for yourself one of the many most easily enacted defense mechanisms. This is avoidance. And so by all means, throw this book away now. Otherwise, we will remain subject to what is funneled through an unending supply of entertainments, distractions, and alternative commonplace forms of communication. And this is just a few, albeit a few large ones, that successfully prevent us from entertaining the other side of the coin, an accurate perception of ourselves relative to the environments in which we are placed. Between these lines, I urge you to discover this story for yourself. Take note of the happenings that become apparent. As a result of your own choice to proceed, give, practice, expand, pray, meditate, or otherwise, receive the blessings that are at hand, and consider that we are all karmically inclined. Bear in mind that perhaps we have all been unnaturally developed to varying degrees of egoic tendencies, oppositions to personal change and transformation, or otherwise. This is the concept of evolution, which opposes the misunderstood notion of revolution. For in lieu of staying the same, I share with you most prominently this. There is a much more devastating possibility that is likely to ensue singularly and instantaneously, devastating what has become what I outline and define as the construct. Throughout this text, we will discover many ideologies and philosophies, as well as entertain many spiritual practices and positions. The aim is to reveal that fundamentally principles always prevail over any single individual's personality. A personal obstacle will become evident in time, but this is my intention for you. And so I pray that a doorway to your own personal freedom will open, that every illusion will blur, eventually fading completely away, and commencing to devalue anything delusional, external, or unreal, for precisely what already resides harmoniously within the divine construct of your own personal human heart, a life that is worth living. This beginning concludes with a quoted poem by Marianne Williamson called Our Deepest Fear. Our deepest fear is not that we are inadequate. Our deepest fear is that we are powerful beyond measure. It is our light, not our darkness, that most frightens us. We ask ourselves, who am I to be brilliant, gorgeous, talented, fabulous? Actually, who are you not to be? You are a child of God. Your playing small does not serve the world. There's nothing enlightened about shrinking so that other people won't feel insecure around you. We are all meant to shine as children do. We were born to make manifest the glory of God that is within us. It's not just in some of us, it's in everyone. And as we let our own light shine, we unconsciously give other people permission to do the same. As we are liberated from our own fear, our presence automatically liberates others. Let us begin. Chapter 1 of Part 1, Power of Words. As you start to walk on the way appears, by Rumi. As is only possible following an experience, I have come to believe something profound. But first, allow me to set an appropriate intention by sharing this prayer. A Prayer of Unknowing by Thomas Merton. My Lord God, I have no idea where I am going. I do not see the road ahead of me. I cannot know for certain where it will end, nor do I really know myself. And the fact that I think I am following your will does not mean that I am actually doing so. But I believe that the desire to please you does in fact please you, and I hope I have the desire in all that I am doing. I hope that I will never do anything apart from that desire, and I know that if I do this, you will lead me by the right road, though I may know nothing about it. Therefore, I will trust you always though I may seem to be lost and in the shadow of death. I will not fear, for you are ever with me, and you will never leave me to face my perils alone. Amen. That's Thomas Merton, Thoughts in Solitude, on page 79, for reference. Just as my aspirations and motivations, I pray, are not solely my own, and although I am rarely, if ever, certain of anything, very little can be true beyond this. The truth requires no defense, as is outlined by these quotes by Mark Twain. If you tell the truth, you don't have to remember anything, and truth is the most precious thing we have. Economize it. As we begin to uncover these initial words and proceed further through and into a complete thought, and eventually through this full chapter, please allow me to rely solely on a natural flow that bleeds from my fingertips, not dissimilar to an open wound waiting for the natural healing response of coagulation to begin. Let us embrace the pain and realism with gladness, because in this moment we know one thing for certain, that we are indeed living. The Journal. 1.0, the Journal. Personal thought for the day. If you might allow my heart to bleed, a sonnet may fall from heaven. As an expression upon the morning's wake, I might count beyond 10 and to 11. Enough of building walls so tall, defensively contained within, as eventually the earth will shake, and when these illusions crumble, a life is risked, for comfort's sake. To write is to save my life every day, reminding me of the value of this day's new experience, and for that I do indeed bleed. I share this as a simple expression to enliven my enthusiasm for the day ahead. Today. Stay tuned. An overwhelming desire to become something. And so we begin, and yes, that is in fact a run-on sentence. What is revealed beyond this overtly obvious simplification, smoldering with desire, has in recent years become disastrously definitive in full scope. To expound appropriately, as this book is intended to do, a few adjectives to consider are, for all intents and purposes, worthwhile, sufficient, strong, capable, memorable, important, or perhaps valuable. These each are apparent and exist somewhere within me, within the seemingly unobservable space where I feel intensely, fiery, openly, honestly, and consciously, and not just something, but perhaps everything. In considering that everything is sincerely obtuse, not definitive, or more aptly said for the alleged layman, masked, and finally an overwhelming desire to become something is revealed. So firstly, at the root of myself, who, how, what, and why am I here? The journal entry, April 10th, 2024. Today is nearly halfway through a month committed to writing specifically about the root chakra, and I must admit that this personal challenge is proving to be much more difficult. Setting the goal of 30 consecutive but different days, sharing thoughts that resonate with earth elements. Should it really be difficult, though? Is it not true that the world that I have come to know is a part of this world naturally? In one way or another, today I acknowledge that even the act of writing words lacks connection with anything tangible for those who read them. It is nothing more than a stream of thoughts falling downward toward my feet, toward my root. It is obvious that intention is with hope that something might encourage or inspire another person to the capacity of a truly transformational shift as well. This is the art within the war of self-realization and self-recognition. However, an occasion, and perhaps more often than I care to acknowledge, some things are intended for me alone. Momentary glimpses and gleanings to otherwise alter the ulterior motives and deceptions within the illusory thinking mind that might otherwise take on a resonant resistance and an alternating direction, a new path. Throughout today and into the next, notwithstanding an egoic tendency, I must observe more of my own posture and place, and beyond that consider who, how, what, and why am I here? When this is indulged, endured, or otherwise, the root of myself is revealed, and then I am moving. I would like to interject here briefly to share that which is significant to me personally and something that has changed since this journal entry just over a year ago. I moved from Ogden, Utah to Peoria, Illinois. Perhaps that will help you to have a glimmer of hope that allows you to begin realizing the potent in potentiality, the intent of intentions and prayers, or whatever you like in these phrases to, and hopefully enliven the enthusiasm for the possibilities that are at hand if we take a chance to trust what is otherwise invisible, the beating rhythm of your heart. Without any actual activity, though, and failing to be decisive in my choice, no matter how many days I stay here writing daily, it will remain true that I must be willing to do the things that I write about. I must allow a deeper part of myself to be revealed, if only to myself, by actively writing. Letting go of how it will land with others, or even if it will land at all, I must write. In researching certain topics, I will most likely not ascertain any tangible connection with others or Mother Earth at all, but my spirit will certainly be enlivened, my curiosity piqued. It is an activity of seeking to understand, but not an actual understanding. To truly know anything, it must come by way of walking the path, not talking or writing about the path. So as I found myself increasingly frustrated in the judgment of others who I hear regularly sharing non-personal and rhetorical messages, listening to their bickering, banter, and idle chatter, I recognize a sea of unenthusiastic people who, to me, are disillusioned, convinced perhaps that their words mean something, and their behavior screams of a desperation to create a change that is not theirs to make. I am guilty of judging them, and in so doing have robbed myself of doing precisely the same thing in this moment. After all, at any given moment, I must recognize that we are all doing something. We are giving our energy and attention away when we focus on what is beyond us in lieu of whatever is present and pertinent. With these insights consciously observed, I intend to walk the path, and when I choose to start, I recognize that this is certainly a different direction, a new direction. Away instead of into I will trudge, onward and upward and into whatever spaces come, and in whatever timing necessary. The only lingering consideration is that any notion of a defensive stance might prevent me the appropriate opportunity to experience happiness, joy, and wholeness. An alteration of my indulgent behaviors and attitudes must precede the blessing. From the perspective of personalization, I am deserving exactly what I am receiving. But what I have chosen to do in this space that is different this time is to actively observe less of the world and more of myself. So in lieu of the indulgence of the unconscionable conversations and bitter streams of gossip and drama, I must embark upon yet another journey into a foreign field of study. I must do less and in turn receive more, give something by doing nothing, surrender to win. This is the doorway to my faith. In lieu of my tendency to amplify, in its stead, there is a new possibility and an opportunity that had not previously existed. To observe consciously universal laws that govern this planet, Mother Nature, and the elemental truths that resonate on Earth, allowing them to be unveiled, revealed, interpreted in real time, and received. Only this can aid in my own deeper connection to the solution that might become a consortium of order out of the otherwise chaotic mess that I have been enamored with for far too long. What a profoundly simple idea, right? So today I must do the smallest of things with increased gratitude, so that when I pray and meditate, when I take a shower, when I brush my teeth, when I gaze out the window upon the rain-soaked ground, when I cook breakfast, when I make a call and listen intently to someone I respect, value, and care about, in the same way that I would listen to a song that resonates with my soul, deeply and intensely, when I drink my tea, when I pet and embrace my dogs, when I stretch, when I write, it might land like concrete at my own feet, moving me to the core, inspiring my body to move more succinctly and definitively, knowing what it means to walking. I am indeed on the way. Although I acknowledge how unsatisfying spending the majority of 40 years wandering in circles on this planet has been thus far, I remain hopeful that in some obscure way, whatever is to come upon the following page after page after page might prevail to prove revealing, a pronunciation of a testimony told 1,000 times over, yet radically subdued by adversarial forces. I ask now, though, something of you. Your permission to continue radically transforming the intangible tenets of these sensationalist writings into resonant and raw concordant truth that might reveal a story that has in fact or fiction already been written, but not with words. It is the story written within your DNA. The concerto of emphatic perpetuation of fears that linger as the result of a generational happenstance, prevailing to sway a child away from their skills and incarnate blessings for worldly pursuits, having been caught up in the perpetual game of life, all the while becoming an indentured servant to the exorbitant costs of living wherein the price is your soul. With words that have so long been buried in the rubble of an analog era, incapable of communicating clearly or conveying passionately feelings, the feelings that have been held back generationally, remaining trapped below the rubble of a most insidious palace, ruins, energetically disillusioning the modern-day individual's analytical thinking mind and placing innumerable pervasive distractions upon the way, their way, our way. This story conveyed with these words will finally prevail to fall into place. And so, having surrendered completely to whatever order they do proceed to fall, I merely wish to state that these are words that have in fact already been written upon my DNA, that have been needed to be released for the sake of my soul. So if you might indulge me, perhaps there are only two obvious things that have been missing up until now: willingness and a blank canvas. A piece of paper will suffice for now. The most pervasive energy is evident within my mind's eye today, and I realize that I must utilize the time that I am being gifted to become an instrument of peace for the benefit of the for the benefit of the whole, not the self. It is in fact all that I have ever really desired subconsciously, so allow me to share, to rely on something I do not understand, to surrender to my truth, to write these words, trusting that whatever may come will inevitably resemble the best motive I have ever known. This motive is my most sincere intention: to love a world that I have grown to hate. And so it begins, a journey through words and expressions highlighting the concordant rhythmic physical plane where my breath expands and contracts. A cool air enters me consciously, regulating my core temperature from boiling to calm, and herein my heart continues to beat seamlessly. Although I am not certain that I always had a desire to write or sing or play anything at all, I can recall the very first words I had ever written in song form. They appeared similarly to these words upon a blank piece of paper. The guitar. We will have to begin here with the happenings that define my soulful heart. Inspired by none other than a seemingly unfortunate circumstance, I placed my attention primarily on learning to play the guitar, but not just any guitar. It was in fact the guitar that had not been out of its case for many years, the guitar that my mother would play and sing with nightly when I was just a toddler, and while I was sleeping in the only finished bedroom of an otherwise unfinished basement. I recall the resonance of her voice, the laughter and the joy amongst the musicians that spent a lot of time there, carrying on jubilantly late into the night. The knee surgery. As it would seem, the circumstance was knee surgery, which I needed, having suffered an injury while playing soccer as a sophomore in high school. Many months had gone by since the initial injury, and I was playing basketball with friends daily and without much pain, but alas, as planned, the date for my surgery arrived. There had been ample time to get everything right and have a game plan in place. It was to be an unintrusive scope of the knee with up to 4 small incisions at each corner. I do not recall exactly what had been done preliminarily at this time, either an X-ray or MRI, but it was certainly not both. Regardless, there had certainly been ample time for discovery of whatever the actual issue was. While I was under the knife, it had apparently become evident that there was a much larger issue, and so without my permission or knowledge, when I woke up, I came to find out that my knee had been completely cut open. A severed portion of my femur just below my patella was removed, and the area had been filled with soft tissue from other parts of my knee in order to take the place of the large amount of cartilage that they had needed to be sufficiently replaced. This single choice was not one that I chose consciously. As it is with doctors and their procedures, whether it be life-threatening or not, they just seem to do whatever it is that they feel is necessary. This man could not have known precisely what the heart of me had desired, and in making this decision, he distorted my timeline of competing and playing, and herein is an extremely evident life circumstance which I have had a very hard time accepting. I was a whole different person prior to this moment, and yet it was not the most impactful event of this day. Something much more cataclysmic was occurring beyond my awareness, laying uncomfortably in my bed at home attempting to heal. The knee surgery had completely rendered my future hopes of competing and playing, and my spirit was smashed. I was a competitive and fiery, skinny guy that was just starting to finally make some friends, having moved back to California from Utah only 6 months prior. Among my teammates and on that field was where I thrived, and now I had been able to filter out all the rage that had been boiling inside of me while at home. I would never play another team sport again, fulfilling the prophecy given to me by an ill-prepared surgeon, who I might add literally ran into a wall instead of finding the door whilst leaving the room that we were in just before surgery. I'm convinced he was eyeing my mom, perhaps because, well, everyone did. She is a very beautiful woman indeed. The stepbrother. As unfortunate as that event was, it was not the worst. Allegedly, or coincidentally, or paradoxically, hell, I do not claim to know why, but something even more disastrous than knee surgery happened within these 24 hours. This would have a lasting impact on our family for our life. My eldest stepbrother from back home, who was nearly a full decade older than I, had committed suicide. Yes, indeed, upon the very first waking moments of my first rest at home following the knee surgery, I was awakened by my mother coming down the hall extremely early in the morning, phone in hand, saying this to me: "Your father needs to speak to you." Before the phone had even found its way into my hand, I had known what had happened. Somewhere deep inside of me, intuition was present, and I had muttered, according to those who were there, "Adam?" as I began to weep. It was as if I had somehow felt the universe speaking what had already occurred, but not yet confirmed. The reality that my stepbrother had not survived the night was communicated over the telephone by the broken words of a father who was barely able to speak. He was in Utah, going through it in real time. The resonance of so much loss in such a short time was devastating. I was 15 years old. This is certainly the most traumatic moment of my youth, but in the wake of these events came a whole new time for introspection, self-expression, and personal writing, which had become something regular in recent months by way of a journal. The journal. I had a journal for the first time in my life that I was actively writing in. It is the book beyond books that revealed to me much more about the reality of me than any other book can. Within it are the dreams and fantasies that existed within the mind of a sophomore boy. And thus, of the many books on my bookshelf today, I still have it and fondly reference it from time to time. Through every changing season in my life, I have always known precisely where this book is among the many books. I never wish to forget precisely what flowed out of me on that day. It is not just the words. Moreover, it is recognizing the overwhelmed, nervous handwriting that reveals the truth of that day to me. I long to express but not validate the feelings, to ease my nervous system from the raw pain and trauma of the occurrence. The emotion that is evident within the mess of my scribbling that day is unprecedented depth of consciousness that encapsulates a possibility that I've sought to discover and perhaps validate ever since. What appears upon a mere piece of paper and what can be resonantly felt still when I go back to my journal entry on March 22nd, 2001, is perhaps the most real thing that I have ever read. The guitar continued. And so, while I was stuck in the house rehabilitating without anything to do otherwise, my attention was wholly devoted to learning to play the guitar. But this was not just any guitar, it was my mother's guitar. This instrument was the guitar which my mother had not played and sang with for many years now. It was an instrument which I deeply longed for comfort's sake. It was endearing and peaceful, emitting the resonance of potential perhaps. An instrument that had been utilized to tap so comfortably upon my heart many years ago. It had not been heard for a long time at that point, and I certainly could not make it sing like my mother had been able to. But regardless, my effort to learn had commenced. My mother. My beautiful mother was always the center of attention. She would sing and play music whimsically with her sister in a most harmonious way, and had such a playful spirit while doing it. It would be impossible not to desire the ability to do just the same if you were her eldest child as well. At this point in time, though, the playfulness and levity were not prominent. In fact, I would say that it was a depressing time, not just for me, but for our whole family. On stage at church on Sundays, my mother would sing, but my mom's personal touch to the songs that she had written were altogether a whole different thing to behold. She was a star in her own right, and that is clear to this day. She is a light that shines ever so brightly. Among crowds, she continues to live a good life, perpetually seeking opportunities to continue singing and playing still. This is perhaps the greatest gift from my mother to me, reminding me that it is imperative to remain expressive and in the flow and spirit of life, to continue writing, singing, and playing endearing and timeless tunes. The song. The art of writing is less about the quantity and more about the quality, more about the flow that resonates with what is occurring internally. In moments when I can become virtually oblivious to what is present externally, feeling everything internally, a flow of words that are unlike any other find their way onto pages. With that said, the feelings that were present during that season were 100% internal. The world had disappeared, my world had essentially tanked, and introspection had perhaps become habitual. Looking inwardly is very different than attempting to paint a big picture using broad strokes. It would be like defining a landscape that had never been seen. So in lieu of the recent events came the song. The words of the songs essentially held back all the other words that had been falling aimlessly onto the page prior to March 22nd, 2001. Yes, I was stuck within the walls of an extremely uncomfortable home, for me a place I loathed being, and I was most certainly not happy about my knee situation, absolutely devastated about my brother. But the journal became just a book to me following that entry. What I was feeling came out in the form of a song, a completely foreign concept to me at this time of my life. My next journal entry was nearly a week later, nothing profound, just lingering sadness and observation of an apparent life, and the next over a month later. And since there are even wider gaps between entries, but at least there are entries. Finally, when more important women came into my life during high school, there are memorably and worthwhile entries to glean more insight from. But for now, what is important to know is this: the writing of words, poems, and song took the place of my journal writings, sacrificing the abundance of words for a much narrower field of self-expression, the most resonant words. Of all the words that I have ever written, these words hit me to my core and resonate with my immediate family as well. The song healed me like no other medicine could have. Yes, time would relieve the lingering pain in my knee from aching, but it would never relieve the pain from remembering that day and the abrupt season that came. There was some playful poetry and even some very deep, profound potential songs, but there will always be the first song that I did not just write it, I also sang it. For a string of words to become a song, it is far beyond getting the words onto a paper. It is actualized when the harmonious combination of both words and tone, vibrations and frequencies begin to mingle together as if they are dancing. There is an evident tingling in the air that can make the hair stand up like static electricity is known to do. Although the chords were simple in a drop D tuning set, which I had become most comfortable and familiar with, I began to sing my first song. I could feel the hesitation in my throat, a lack of comfortability, being completely unexperienced, the novice attempting to do something for the very first time, and certainly desiring to heal, but not fearing the repercussions. I unconsciously had given myself permission to reveal my essence, my rage, my mistrust, and my hate to become known. It was as if I were opening an emotionally charged fire hose that would hit hard and true, and it would certainly hurt. I had not yet comprehended the concept of healing from something like this before, though. So as I began to mumble the words to a rough strumming of chords and to myself, I recall that my spirit was alleviated and lifted upward, even if only in a cowardly and limited way. I had written a song, but desiring to share these words with anyone else was a whole different ballgame. I was not yet comfortable enough to sing and play at the same time. Seemingly, but regardless of my fear, I took the opportunity that presented itself on Mother's Day to sing and play these words for the very first time upon the floor of our living room in Clovis, California. And the first line, "All I want to do is save the world, as if." It was appropriately titled As If, and to this day is probably my most requested song to play among my immediate family. There are many words that have been spoken, many songs that have come and gone, but not even one of them that remains as resonant as these words for me, the words that make up the whole of that song. In years since, these words have unequivocally become a part of my essential soul self, concretely creating a man that I had never planned on becoming, but I believe today I had to become despite the man that persists to avoid the path. The man that was willing to abuse this gift and lose this gift. The perpetuated human experience that came because I have for many seasons also avoided this gift to achieve. What? A paycheck? A decent life? A decent job? A decent house? Nay. I have had just that desire always to save the world. But from what? My heart and soul. My heart and soul. What is constantly tapping gently upon the inner linings of my heart, and perhaps even my soul, is an unbridled passion to explore the inner workings of not just my pain, but our collective pain. The words to that song have always existed, unconscious as they may seem, and so as of today, I remain at the core of my being, rippling unconsciously beyond myself into the ethereal plane of existence, attempting to accomplish just that prerogative. And yet, for most of my days, permitting months and years to pass by, I lost sight of these words, becoming disillusioned by the bigness, the broadness, and the vastness of a world I most certainly have never understood. As I recall playing and singing this song for the first time, I was also witnessing my mother cry, truly proud and joyous tears that only a mother can cry. And I had felt it intensely then, just as I can now. And I will also then begin to cry tears that only a son can cry. In that moment of pure ecstasy, I had realized something profound. The power of resonance is revealed through a most heart-wrenching, authentic expression. When I prevail beyond my own fear and share my creativity, the hardness becomes softness, the heat becomes cool, the rage becomes resonant. And so, as it is now, nearly a full quarter century later, in remembrance of this initial lyric, I beg the question to a broader audience. Am I the only one? 1.1. The impetus. There are far too many possibilities in this process to believe that I must choose the right way, or worse, that somehow my efforts will lead me down the wrong path. Although many individuals who I have encountered on my journey have certainly attempted to lure me into their beliefs, borders, and boundaries, I adamantly refuse for the sake of my individuality. You may think that is selfish, and that is perfectly understandable. But if I may be so bold and unapologetic when I respond in my thinking and saying, fuck off. A personal truth, when expressed wholeheartedly, has some most convincing implications. However, firstly, I recognize that there has rarely, if ever, been an emotional response felt solely because it was shared. It is felt because we remain unhealed and perpetually affected by a mutually shared experience of life. Let me share something to consider briefly on that note. As I recount from my memory bank, a consistently egregious reaction that I have always had to the words, "be careful." Internally, my stomach churns, the recognition of an immediate feeling of disgust surfaces, and it is extremely real to me. Beyond that feeling is a resounding and precarious thought that percolates the inner working of my mind. They are not protecting me, they are preventing me from experiencing something. And herein lies the juxtaposition. This is where I recognize that I have a desire for something beyond myself. There is something that I have no control over. It exists beyond me and in the present. The desire is insatiable. It requires the opposing attractor field of neutrality to be revered. But separation from the rest of the world as it relates to my decisions and choices is not yet attainable because of this desire to expand, explore, and experience for myself. It precedes my understanding of, well, perhaps anything and everything that I have not yet come to know. I recognize that I constantly crave to feel and know what I do not yet feel or know. This is what is pleasurable to me in this world, and it will only be conceived subsequently in the aftermath, perpetually following in the form of consequence of each and every new experience that comes throughout my life. This quote is attributed to Vincent van Gogh and has been translated from a letter written in 1885, which was addressed to fellow painter Anton van Rappard, and was originally written in Dutch, saying, "I am always doing what I cannot do yet in order to learn how to do it. I always think that the best way to know God is to love many things. It is with the reading of books the same as with looking at pictures. One must, without doubt, without hesitation, with assurance, admire what is beautiful. Just because one individual or group of people have learned something profound, real, or helpful, this does not translate automatically into an objective truth. I can only pray for those who do not understand the difference between mental and physical limitations. Although we may come to understand something, no matter how profound the knowledge discovered seems to any individual, this does not by any stretch of the imagination create a vortex of magnetic propulsion for the whole of humanity. So, strictly speaking, regarding the mental faculties, the implications of dissuading another's self-discovery in these matters can have severe consequences on our collective development. On May 6, 1954, a man by the name of Roger Bannister achieved something that the world had previously not believed to be possible. At the time, many believed that it would perhaps be fatal to strive for such a goal. This achievement is known and remembered as the 4-minute mile. What is even more astonishing than this accomplishment was when, within a few weeks, another man named John Landy surpassed his record by 2 whole seconds. This breakthrough in a single person's physical ability in the years to come was proven possible by an increasingly younger and broader collection of people. Now that is truly amazing. So, when one man finally set the record book straight for the fastest mile ran at 4 minutes, immediately behind him were many others who achieved the same goal. So if the blurring of lines and chopping down of previously accepted norms is where one separates themselves from the rest, from being captive to judgment or alternatively finding the flow of life through acceptance, then who are we to prevent this possibility? So let us recognize those who have achieved something beyond our own limitations. Thank them for giving so much of themselves abundantly and unselfishly through their efforts and toils. Let us acknowledge them for their glorious demonstrations and praise whatever has made these observations possible, to that which is most beautifully made possible for us too. Neutrality requires trust in God or deity, an understanding of universal laws like karma, and an ability to be mentally and physically unaffected by the happenings of another. Devaluing anyone's personal path, choice, and direction is in fact harmful to the growth process that will certainly take place in time. The result may most likely be only personal, but there remains a possibility which has global implications. So consider that dissuading another from authentically discovering an expression or accomplishment is irresponsible, selfish, and ignorant. Avoidance merely results in the successful prevention of authentically discovering our personal purpose and aptitudes. Perhaps it is what has kept closed the otherwise ever so slightly cracked open door which beckons us forward into silent spaces. Before we discover our not so apparent inclinations, tendencies, attitudes, and impacts on others, we are comfortable, yes, but rarely neutral. An objective reality cannot be mutually comprehended unless it is universally discovered. So what is the value of a man who discovers authentically a new paradigm? What judgments and barriers are in fact disingenuous? And finally, how can the temperaments of those who stand firmly upon an alleged objective reality become level-headed again, realizing that certain protections may in fact not be dissimilar to the wielding of a double-edged sword? To the ones who know not of this offense, attempting to convince, there is no way around, only through. Just as thoughts give way to actions, give way to habits, you may perceive a right or a wrong way. However, notwithstanding, my counter-argument now relies on this simple principle of that which is new. Who are you to warn, attempting to dissuade my curiosity? I abhor you. I aim to continuously see the world as infinite and full of beautiful new possibilities. May I remain not separate from the innocent boy dressed up as a cowboy with a most especially bright red hat, who hides behind the bushes, cap gun in hand, eagerly awaiting whatever comes next. Pow. Personal thought for the day. I may not be a writer, but I will write. I may not be a singer, but I will sing. I may not be a dancer, but I will dance. I may not be a believer, remaining skeptical and cautious of another's ideology, but I believe. I will always believe in connection, resonance, and authentic feelings of divine bliss. By way of my creative modalities and expressions, I exist only within a relationship with the divine, and not so much the one of your understandings, but mine. Let no other human being's condition dissuade my effort for the sake of their comforts. As if I would not recognize the funnel bribing many into an isolated cog for more effective mass manipulation, false pretense, and obligations. Whereupon I perceive that verbalized opposition to this cohort creates a most confusing retort, as discomfort befalls the fellow who may have already fallen either partially or fully into their own self-limiting definition of themselves. They may still be seeking an agreeable definition, unconsciously becoming more financially and emotionally obligated, yet remaining still, or perhaps worse, heartless. Today may I embrace my fullest divinity, creativity, and expressivity, and not because of a definition I have of myself, or worse, another's definition of myself, but for the sake of personal growth. May I embrace the freedom to most simply be me, to feel me, to act like me, and finally, to love me. Within that which is not understood, I must embrace the day for the sake of my own love, to myself. Stay tuned. 1.2 Distinctions between the two I ams. I wish to focus some attention now on a distinction between the what I am and the ever-evasive who I am. Let me also add that what and who precede how and why, as the latter two are typically revelatory in the beyond spaces of a truly insightful and perceptive reality that is likely not yet attained, provided you are reading and aiming to understand these words still. As I have come to understand, stating just the two words alone, I am, is especially wrought with religious and spiritual connotations. So as a point of reference, in the book of Exodus 3:14, God utters these words emphatically and rhetorically, Ehyeh Asher Ehyeh, or I am that I am. Invariably, interpretations and meanings have been derived from this, and not a single person needs to be condemned for their own assertions from this utterance. All that I intend to convey from this statement is the power that enacted when we use the words I am. God is what he is to you, and as is my assertion regarding neutrality, I pray you find your own practical and personal application to deity in this life. This is not about convincing you of any specific belief, religion, philosophy, or doctrine, but just as it has been deemed worthwhile for every culture across the world to interpret this statement by God, I ask, are we also then willing to consider the implications of stating what we are and who we are? Which seems truer to you? Which statement do you resonate with when you attempt to express yourself? I have come to believe that what I am opposes the truly authentic self, representing who I am, although a multitude of definitions inevitably are attributed to oneself over the course of life. These words, by their very nature, either immediately or eventually become a part of an identity. Who I am is innate, irreplaceable, and cosmically inclined. It is not a name, it is not a career, it is not related to any specific attitude or behavior, and it cannot be altered. It exists within the DNA. It is passed down by ancestors who have walked their paths to completion. The who I am permits this day to exist experientially through the senses, and it is because of who I am that allows me to breathe this breath presently, therefore I am this breath. What I am is contingent upon happenstance in the peripheral. Perhaps the best explanation is a result following any series of circumstances and the respective choices that are made as a result of emotionally charged moments that are interpreted by the subtle body. Its capacity to feel and think harmoniously, and perhaps not dissimilar to the singing of an extremely necessary and personal song. This version of myself does not align with the who I am, and as a result, many karmically inclined happenings may occur constantly. Sometimes these occurrences are obvious, but often they are cloaked and made invisible, intentionally made to be inconceivable, successfully disguised in plain sight. It provokes the soul to react and suffer in consequence and repercussion. Many distinct types and variations of reactions are notable and worth mentioning here, but of the few that come to mind, the first and most dominant to me is chemical dependency in the form of drug abuse. Not far behind this initial thought, though, are euphemisms, etiquettes, and techniques. They become what is most likely expected, typical, or normal, not just in actions, but in expressions. We may or may not recognize it, but something amazing is occurring constantly. A necessary and automatic natural rebalancing is in perpetual effect And so with every breath we take, it grows ever so gradually into something that we do not yet comprehend. What I am is rarely, if ever, who I am. We live in a world conjured up in our mind's eye. We perceive everything through an invisible lens, and we have unwittingly become something catastrophically encumbered by what we either subject ourselves to willingly or are subjected to consequentially. Our minds create meaning constantly and are flooded with subtle stimulus on such a molecular level that it is nearly inconceivable to think that we could ever fully actualize the perfect life. It is imperative to be diligent in your own definitions and the relative reality that we will result from ascribing too much of our identity to definitions that do not resonate. So before we press on, please indulge this brief introduction to one of the 7 Hermetic principles, which is known as the principle of mentalism from the 7 Hermetic principles. The all is mind, the universe is mental. This principle embodies the truth that all is mind. It explains that the all, which is substantial reality underlying all the outward manifestations and appearances which we know under the terms of the material universe, the phenomena of life, matter, energy, and, in short, all that is apparent to our material senses, is spirit, which in itself is unknowable and undefinable, but which may be considered and thought as an universal, infinite, living mind. It's on the Kabbalion, it's called the book, the Kabbalion, page 9. As much as I am tempted to continue citing from this text, I must leave it there. If you find yourself curious about these topics, quotes, authors, and references shared here, please do so. I've certainly only come to know what I know by being dedicated to the discovery and uncovering of these books and philosophies. As a result of the many choices and decisions that we inevitably make, our individual exposure to and tolerance of external happenings, especially as young children, becomes our personal journey consequentially. This gives way to our comprehension, normalization, and permits the most necessary indoctrination to begin, removing the doctrine that perpetuates a cycle of becoming something altogether different than who you are otherwise intended to be. So again, I remind you, if resonance is piqued, follow suit. This book will remain here in the meantime. 1.3. Becoming what I am. The definitions we most intensely identify with inevitably blend and adapt to our personality. This personality develops subconsciously, becoming unprecedented, unapologetically unique, and has an affinity for acting out. Our attitudes and behaviors towards specific stimuli coincide with this on both the microscopic and macroscopic scales, leading to the development of mechanisms, habits, and tendencies. These terms uniquely determine our subjective experience that we begin to create for ourselves within our perceived habitat. The following thoughts may be a bit difficult for some to acknowledge and understand for many reasons that will come in time, but I urge you to remain open to these as a possibility. I can only hope that if you consider these for a period and eventually find a personal method of putting them to the test, eventually you will begin to move toward more personal accountability and responsibility. No matter what, all we will ever encounter is our own uniquely subjective experience. So why are we looking for universal answers to personal questions? Firstly, it is not uncommon that an individual becomes convinced that what is happening in their life is a result of another person or institution, their choices, their attitude, or their behavior. The what if question percolates, and a series of hopeful yet unrelenting thoughts permeate the mind. But in fact, there is never anyone to blame beyond the self. If you may indulge my personal thought here briefly, the self on the shelf. In some way, shape, or form, we have created a ripple in time. A waiting period commences as our personal energy field waxes and wanes, orienting to the who I am beyond the what I am. Secondly, hidden behind very innocent concepts like planning or wanting are extremely subtle but jarring restrictions, preventing us from experiencing what God, the universe, or the natural order of things would otherwise have in store for us. We get caught in the rhythm of our own creation, that we forget altogether that there is so much more to feel and see beyond what we allow because of what has become an egoic one-track mind. This is how it was, how it is, and how it will always be. There are so many more examples, but for now, digest this and put it to the test, however you see fit. Change something simple within a current personal mechanism, habit, or tendency, and wait for the universe to show up expectantly. Nurture versus nature. Within only a few years, the tendencies of a personality will begin to manifest, with an ever-increasing unconsciousness and consequence. Does this not sound dissimilar to something else? Perhaps muscle memory? This is by all accounts what we call programming. A concrete formation of this early in life can become especially flagrant when in conjunction with our soft spots that have developed unconsciously. This is the side of the coin that I have come to know as nurture. There are no objective certainties or singularities on this side, as we are all introduced to the world in our own time and through our own uniquely subjective experience, through the people and places that we encounter firsthand. Let us consider breaking away from certain social norms. I remain hopeful that we can begin to move beyond the circumstances that have perpetually plagued the collective whole of humanity, the attitudes and behaviors that we have observed and fallen into by proxy, so that we might permit the new experience to unfold. I interject here only to make the brief point that very few are afforded this opportunity due to the construct of many current societal norms. But let's move forward and outline the other side of this coin briefly. Nature, which is something that is predetermined, outlined by forces and orientations beyond the perception of even the most conscious mind. It is innate and developed prior to birth, resembling perhaps the ever-elusive who I am. There is only one modality known to me presently that can be practiced for the sake of an abrupt introduction to this past life, and that is through past life soul regression, which utilizes a form of hypnosis that enables an aggressive deep dive into the unconscious and subconscious mind's eye experientially. POW, 1.5 POW, a prisoner of war. As we have been discussing, definitions are attributed to everything in this world. Although there are massive distinctions culturally to what perceptions of beauty, power, health, value, and beyond are, it is imperative to remain open to new possibilities first and foremost. So when, or perhaps if we can come to realize this idea from a more simplistic perspective, I hope that it may reveal most impressively and vividly that a not-so-imaginary prison exists. It is constructed of defense mechanisms, assumptions about a world that invariably affected our attitudes and behaviors towards specific individuals, parties, and institutions. It grows beneath the surface, becomes glaringly obvious to others, while remaining invisible to us. A wall which restricts the who I am from being free has been constructed one unconscious breath at a time. As we learn how to get along with others peacefully and tolerantly, a part of the who I am dissolves. It is altogether diluted by obscure methodologies that are more so collectively experienced, opposing our uniquely individual predispositions within our consciousness. This ever-elusive prison exists within what we have allowed ourselves to become. It inherently detracts from an authentic self from developing, permeating the inner lining of our memory bank. We are instead convinced of increasingly solidified by an endless string of definition about ourselves that we unconsciously entertain within our minds. For better or worse, these ideas have resided within our mind for a long period of time now, and we are subject to them as we would be a warden, the keeper of the alleged peace. The manifestation of a character emerges from words that we never actually intended for ourselves. They oppose what would otherwise be true character, which is measured by principles that are more broadly felt and exist far beyond a singular personality. This is the character which can only be actualized through an ever-increasing rise of consciousness, awareness, and mindfulness. Approaching everyday choices and decisions intentionally whilst exploring and considering the why and how I am, which gives way to the rhetorical answer to the rhetorical question. Character 1, how are you? Character 2, I'm fine, how are you? Character 1, fine. Personal thought for the day. Today we choose to be or not to be. Either to be among the few who dare to dance in the rain, embracing the stormy season for the sake of inspiration, life experiential. Those who seemingly see themselves set apart from the rest, They do not cower from the simpler joys of life. They are elemental by their nature and confidently seek to understand less of the world and more of themselves, or not to be. In the constant state of becoming, coddled by captivity and floating in the hot air balloon of masterfully deceptive illusions, they continuously believe that it will all just work itself out, choosing not to be involved in action or solution, but rather seeking comfort away from the storms. To choose. Stay tuned. So who am I now, today, and presently? The prison walls have many determinations. As for beauty, perhaps I am vain. This avenue goes extremely deep, so consider what this means for you. As for power, we are paradoxically either powerful or powerless. This is most acutely made known in light of the choices we make relative to an accumulated wealth or influence. And as for health, there is much to consider, but for the sake of argument, I prefer to focus on that which is glorified as medicine. Definitions in medicine have become extremely limited from what they actually can be, and vary so dramatically that it has become beyond curious how far leaning one person's tolerance of a medicine is relative to another, especially among varying cultures. For better or worse, generic medicines are seemingly superfluous to a modern-day individual who oftentimes creates a tolerance or develops a tolerance. Yet, we have somehow communally accepted that avoidance of pain is imperative, having not considered the ramifications. Consider that a seemingly harmless pill in fact disguises what our subtle body is intended to help us identify. Today's definition of medicine is extremely limited. It is based solely on the prevention of disease and disavows the very notion that some applications are intended to be used daily for a practical increase in vitality, health, and wellness. Here are a few contrasting and seemingly opposing medicinal perspectives that come to mind for your consideration. Eastern versus Western, sound versus chemical, natural versus conventional, fast versus slow release. Indoctrination has occurred amid the universities, affecting the determinations and practices of the modern doctor in all departments. The result is an aptitude for diagnosis instead of treatment. And if there is a focus here, it is reserved for a perpetuated post-treatment plan rather than practical prevention. The fast-acting, over-the-counter remedy has replaced any notion of a personal care physician. So related to the concept of medicine, our health is not at risk in far too many ways to carry on beyond this for now. An encumbered philosophy defined as modern medicine has merely dissolved the possibility of validating many cultures' discoveries. There are numerous examples, and I urge you to expand your knowledge related to aspects of nature, ceremony, and alternative applications. These practices have continually proven themselves beyond the scope of New Age science to the respective cultures and communities. Which would you trust more? The incentivized physician or the generational wisdom that has been passed down from ancient civilizations? Experienced on this planet for the purpose of healing. What are their ideas concerning medicinal applications? The concepts of language and communication. 1.6. Language is not limited to the definitions within its respective dictionary. It is cultural, full of nuance and character. It may be of practical use to apply these definitions for simple greetings and requests. However, to engage with and more deeply understand a language, it is imperative that you study the words, but oftentimes more intensely the culture of those who use them. And how? Only by this extended application of our study can we comprehend what is communicated beyond words. By this notion, it is important to consider that an authentic dialect is regional and has more conceivable nuance than can even be imagined. Language is the mechanism which distinguishes cultural variation that is inherently natural. Although understanding more of the history of a culture can help you more adeptly intuit a language, to more deeply understand, we recognize that subtle patterns, etiquette, and context are engrossed in its application. A man known as Albert Moravian pioneered a study during the 1950s that considered what has become a well-known outline of effectiveness in communication. It breaks down a variable understanding between body language, which is said to be the most effective universal communicator at roughly 55%, then inflection, which is considerably less demonstrative and effective at 38%, but still extremely more effective than the final elemental piece of the puzzle, our choice of word, at 7%. These numbers were revealed then, so I invite you to also consider that certain postures and presentations of body language, and specifically nuanced inflections and tonalities today, may dramatically alter and sway these percentages, as there are innumerable categories of tribes, languages, cultures, and individuals, not to mention methods of communication, that are evident today, but were not at that time. Beyond this, just let us also take note that conjugation differs massively between languages, just as one notable focus is related to past, present, or future tense. Equally as important are distinctions and differences between first and third person dialogue, subtlety and placement of euphemism, and the respective relationships between individuals involved in the dialogue. If this were not the case, what would an inside joke be? If you do not know your proper conjugation, you can accidentally express something unintentionally fairly easily. Regardless of what dialect you speak, let us acknowledge that nearly all commonly spoken languages today communicate primarily using a personal device, and each with their own uniquely designed algorithmic tendencies. This has persisted to grow paradoxically to astronomical lengths and heights. All you must do is look at the companies that exist atop the charts, a system that is constantly declaring their monetary valuations within the S&P 500, NASDAQ, or otherwise. They become the most valuable companies, the redeemers, the holy realm of creators existing seemingly above the rest, the richest and the most powerful. They have succeeded in developing hardware and software that we cannot separate ourselves from wholly or effectively and still expect to survive in their world harmoniously. An unbecoming spirit who has proceeded to push back has been rendered hopeless, helpless and haplessly flapping about like a fish out of water, gasping for air. But in the present, that water has become the strings of data that we unwittingly give away to any number of these tech companies. The alleged choice of service provider is no choice at all. We are purely motivated by the immediate awareness of the best deal and the most immediate incentive at hand, which makes the moving of puzzle pieces in circumstances extremely convenient. So I pose the question, what is it that is most extremely personal to you? Something that you would not want anyone in the whole world to know, and then consider that they already do know just that very thing. This is a question I have dealt with, and one which has been revelatory of the world that I live in. What if we are the demise of what had been an advanced civilization, but subject to an unreasonable game of cat and mouse? We have floundered about, enduring a lifetime of conveniences and indulgences. An inevitable increase in leverage of an adversarial force is in play, and so, as these features inevitably prevent uniqueness, intuitiveness, and sincerity in our correspondence amongst each day, they also place us directly in the firing line. Let's consider that this may have massive implications, preventing many of us from deciphering deeper meanings that are intended beyond the words alone. I am confident that an example resulting in ineffective and unintended communication will flood into your frontal cortex instantaneously. Modern technological advancements and their impressive gimmicks are merely anecdotal. The variations are beyond my comprehension because I have personally preferred to limit my data exposure to what has become the undisclosed utility of personal information. Regardless of any of my attempts, it is as obvious to me as I hope it is to you. These modal communication tools distract users with humorous filters, elaborate skits, and a whole lot of unintelligible masquerading. Essentially, authentic expressions are void, and in their stead is an unending barrage of personalities streaming through an impersonal communication device. There has been a slight increase in the utility of video chatting, however, the quality of reception is especially limited, and there has been a notable lapse in that technology over many years. Within that time, my suspicions have been augmented by observations of numerous business models and their respective valuation in the markets. I venture to assert that far too many abuses of power are nefarious, uncompromising, and beyond recompense to their users. For real, though, am I really saying anything that we do not already know? As our data has increasingly and primarily been used for the conversion of personal freedoms into conveniences, the unconsciously captivated audience carries on laughing and avoiding the only obstacle worth facing, the self. Please consider that today, profiteering is what is the end-all be-all, and the efficacy of these mechanisms within an industry determine their valuations among many global markets. Having been entrenched unaware of the disguise, I pray that we might begin to comprehend the effects that insincere data strings, adept and intuitive communication strategies, and the many fallacies amid data evaluations are preemptively having on our communities. A communications degree today creates a pundit who is exceptional at delivering the news. Their presentation is astute, but also staged. A worldview is broadcast through their employer's economically inclined agenda, and with their team of writers, camera operators, and extremely intentionally placed microphones, they are given the power to reenact, embolden, and create the focal points and aperture of a reality that we are supposed to accept as real, important, and necessary. However, what has become clearer in recent years is that any provocation of the messaging is not welcome. It is deemed invaluable, dismissed, and buried beneath an algorithmic tendency that has been permitted to exist. Amid the presentation, we find the consequence that stems from a personal decision to act or speak against what is being presented. What is it to retort? Retort. Verb. Say something in answer to a remark or accusation, typically in a sharp, angry, or wittily incisive manner. No need to be rude, retorted Isabel. Repay an insult or injury. Was now his time to retort the humiliation. Noun. A sharp, angry, or wittily incisive reply to a remark. She opened her mouth to make a suitably cutting retort. We will conclude there for the day. We have been reading for roughly an hour and 20 minutes. So thank you. We'll pick up at 1.7 on the next reading. And I hope that this gives you a nice good start to the book of Nahx. Peace.